Dear friends, please take your seats so that we can start. Thank you so much. Warmly welcome to the Unep at 50 seminar here in Helsinki in the Ministry of the Environment. My name is Annika Lindblom and I'm the head of unit for international EU affairs here in the Ministry of the Environment, and I'm going to moderate this seminar today. So this is a hybrid meeting. We have a room full of participants, but we have also people attending virtually. I don't know if we have a number, how many are attending virtually? Emmy, is there a number of people that we know? Many. Okay, not yet, many. So this was I was going to say thousands, probably, yes. This is the first proper summer day here in Finland. And of course, it is the only possible weather to celebrate 50-year-old Unep. So very pleased that we are able to gather here together and also have some distinguished guests with us. Many of us have returned from Stockholm Plus 50 meeting. We returned on Saturday, and we are happy to have also Executive Director Inger Andersen, with whom we met also in Stockholm. But I do believe that we bear with us many takeaways from the Stockholm Plus 50 meeting, and those discussions can flourish our seminar also here today. But without further ado, I will kick off this seminar by asking our Minister of the Environment and Climate Change, Emma Kari, to open the seminar. The floor is yours.
We can change to make it interesting.
Thank you, Annika. And good morning, all dear friends. It is my great honor to welcome you all to this Unep at 50 seminar, both those in the room and the thousands of people joining us online. We are very privileged to have as our guest of honor a tireless environmental champion, the executive director of the UN Environment Program, Inger Andersen. You're more than welcome. I also warmly welcome the Director General of the International Union for Conservation of Nature, Iucn, Dr. Bruno Oberle, who I had the great honor of meeting earlier today, as well as my esteemed colleague, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Pekka Haavisto. 50 years ago in Stockholm, a group of visionary leaders gathered to establish the UN Environment Program. A lot has been achieved since then, yet now we're facing triple planetary crises: climate, biodiversity, and pollution. Today, to solve these crises, we need to be at least as bold as those leaders 50 years ago. Following the Stockholm Conference in 1972, ministers of environment were established around the world, also here in Finland. And the importance of the work of the Ministry of Environment has been a constant increase ever since. Just this year, a new climate act that includes our 2035 climate neutrality target was adopted. A new Nature Protection Act has been tabled to the Parliament. We have also started preparations for a new Nature Act that would set our ambition to halt biodiversity loss and become nature positive in our law. Friends, together we can make a difference. One proof of that is the Unep's achievements over the last 50 years. Thanks to the support of Unep and its dedicated staff and leaders, the global community has been able to conclude numerous environmental agreements that are significantly improving our lives and the state of our planet as well as we speak. The reversal of the depletion of the ozone layer is certainly among one of the greatest achievements of multilateral environmental cooperation. Unep serves as a host to international climate and biodiversity work and supplies international community with scientific evidence that must guide our work. Friends, Finland and Unep are long-term partners and friends since the very beginning. Finland has been a steadfast ally, and we have always sought to strengthen international environmental governance and Unep's work. A recent important advance is the work to prepare a global agreement to tackle plastic sea pollution. It is an important achievement in the light of our current situation. Plastic is soon more prevalent in our seas than fish and can be found in babies even before they're born. In the heart of environmental crisis lies overconsumption. To tackle this challenge, we are active part in the preparation of a new global strategy for sustainable consumption and production. I am happy that Finland will be able to support the implementation of the strategy with a financial contribution of 1 million euros. Dear Inge, I would like to assure you that the work of Unep will continue to be a priority for Finland and my ministry, and we will continue to put our enthusiasm and expertise at your disposal. I would also like to recognize the contribution of many of our partners in our Unep work, many who are also present in this seminar today. Thank you. And I wasn't finished. But just to conclude, last week many of us had the honor to attend the Stockholm 50 meeting, and from this meeting I would like to raise two messages. First, the past 2 years have shown that the world is able to do a quick transition. Now we need the same determination to accelerate the green transition in a manner that leaves no one behind. The need to reform our economies and policies is more urgent than ever. And second, the obligation and in our interest to involve young people in all decision-making affecting their future. I look forward to hearing the message from the youth also in our program today. In this era of triple planetary crisis, the world needs leadership and champions. Unep has served as the environmental champion for 50 years, and the world needs it more than ever. I wish you all a good seminar and interesting discussions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister. And now I'm privileged to invite our guest, Executive Director Inger Andersen from United Nations Environment Programme, to provide us or give us a keynote speech on UNEP's past and future 50 years. The floor is yours, Madam.
Well, thank you. And from such a beautiful spring day here in always stunning Helsinki. In fact, I've had the pleasure of coming here in the dead of winter when the city sparkles with a zillion diamonds. And now you come here with the city showing its glory in the spring sun. What a privilege. So thank you so much for everyone who's here online and in presence. We meet just after Stockholm Plus 50 has closed, as we heard from Minister. And Minister, for those who were not present, you should know that she was the hero of the hour and celebrated by Minister Yasmin Fuad of Egypt considerably. So thank you for your work. And obviously, Pekka Haavisto, Foreign Minister, how could I not thank you? A long, hard-working career in environment and now a distinguished Foreign Minister. It is a pleasure that you are with us and grace us with your presence. And my dear friend Bruno, head of Iucn, and many colleagues around the hall. It is a real pleasure. This environmental movement that started when a few souls had this idea to bring together the world, this idea that floated in 1969, and Olof Palme, as you may recall, was at that time quite engaged in the non-aligned movement, and in the non-aligned movement, so was Indira Gandhi of India, these two strong powers that wished to engage on the environmental space. Interesting to know that Indira Gandhi had been environment minister, was an IUCN commissioner, and had been very engaged indeed in environmental matters. So from these few threads that wove together the tapestry of Stockholm, the tapestry of the Stockholm Declaration, came then this tapestry of multilateral environmental agreements that guides us from everything to protecting the ozone layer, to manage our chemicals properly, to ensuring that we combat climate change, desertification, and biodiversity loss. Minister Curry has referenced the Montreal Protocol, so I will not do that. But it is remarkable, and sometimes we forget, because of the current crisis that we are facing, we forget the achievements that we have already made, the achievements that we literally had a hole in the sky, actually two holes in the sky, depleting the ozone layer with our use of chemicals that are ozone-depleting substances, and yet the world found the opportunity to come together and phase out these chemicals. And it was not easy. These are the fire foams, the carpets, and the hairsprays, and the air conditioners, and the refrigerators. It was not simple, and yet the world understood the imperatives. It is that spirit that we need to take into climate change, to biodiversity loss, and to other pollutions and waste. During Unep's 50 years of existence, we've also been the proud midwives of the IPCC, together with our friends at the WMO, of IPBES, together with other friends. We're proud to host IPBES, of course, and to co-host IPCC. And just this March, the world took the decision that there shall be a third triplet to these two panels, namely a panel that will focus on the impact of pollution from chemicals and waste. So we will end up having 3 scientific panels, one on climate, one on biodiversity and ecosystems, and yes, one on pollution from chemicals and waste. So that journey has been significant. This is about the triple planetary crisis. It hasn't been named previously, but I found that if we put it into its 3 blocks, it's easier for people to understand, and it's easier to communicate, and it works because people can understand we must take care of the planet and its nature, we must take care of our climate, and we certainly must make sure that we do not pollute our way to poverty. Humanity understands now that a healthy environment drives sustainable development, drives poverty reduction, and that is the way forward. So yes, we have made progress, but much of the progress lies ahead of us and is still to be made. Because we can't promise our way to prosperity. Promises are easy. We need to act. And that triple planetary crisis is not a little kid in the playground being upset and throwing a temper tantrum. This is real, this is immediate, this is urgent, this is existential. The IPCC tells us that global warming has caused climate injustice and dangerous disruption to the natural world. Just look at what's happening in India and Pakistan right these weeks. 50 degrees centigrade. 50 degrees. We think it's hot today in beautiful Helsinki. Double that and then some, and you are in New Delhi. So hot that birds are literally dropping from the sky. That is not a temperature that can be sustained by any being that we know of. And if that is not apocalyptic, I don't know what is. The science on climate is unequivocal, unassailable, and undeniable. And unfortunately, unless we take action, it is only going to get worse. My friends, and Petri Talas, who's also a proud Finn, who is the head of the WMO, his organization, the WMO, recently came out 2 weeks ago with a report that states that we are within a 50-50 chance within the next 5 years of just bypass 1.5. We're already above 1 degree, of course, and at the polar ends, which includes northern Finland, we are at a higher temperature increase. So we understand, and we also understand that we are likely to see one large-scale disaster, climate-related, every day by 2030 as the climate change increases. And these disasters will have greater intensity and greater frequency and obviously greater damage. So, and meanwhile, IPCC's IPBES, the platform that deals with biodiversity ecosystem services, tells us that unless we take action, we stand to lose 1 million species out of the 7.8 million that we have on this good earth. And you could say, what does that matter? 7.8, you lose a butterfly here and an orchid there and a little earthworm there, so what? But ecosystems are these finely tuned systems where each species depends on another, and you lose one and you can indeed find ecosystem collapse. So this is not a way that we want to live. And meanwhile, 11 million people died prematurely from pollution. So the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, and indeed the pollution crisis are real. And we do not, my friends, have another 50 years to get this right. It is the next 10 years that will matter the most, because our bathtub, the atmosphere, will flow over with CO2, quote unquote. And then when it does flow over, we emit about 55 billion cubic meters, 55 billion tons a year, and we have, on a good day, about 900 billion tons left. And so when it flows over, that is it. We have transpassed it. And then it will take a very long time, and we will not be around to see it, for us to bring that down below that 1.5 degrees, and that would mean an immediate stop, obviously, of all carbon emissions, even to try to peak at a much later time. So that's why we have to peak now, 2025, 2030. We must peak as soon as we possibly can and bend that curve. So what then do we have to do? I'd like to offer up for you sort of a to-do list of 5 that I ask that you take away and use when you engage in your communities, in your activities, schools, places of worship, places of work, in the voting booth, over the dinner table. These things matter. First of all, recognizing that promises for what will happen in 2040, that's fine, but I tell you, none of the people who make these promises are going to be around when those promises are going to be cashed in. So those promissory notes are not that valuable. It's actually what happens in now, here and now, that sets us on a trajectory of meaningful transformation. But what are then these 5 things that I say? First of all, we have to get very real about the energy transition. We can't continue our reliance on fossil fuel, full stop. We have to, and the Secretary General has made it very clear, stop financing new fossil fuel infrastructure. It's just going in the diametrically opposite way, and we have to instead put all our efforts, our ingenuity, our wisdom, and our smarts into renewable energy. The answer is to move to renewable energy coupled with energy efficiency, coupled with expanded access. Please understand that we sit here with the lights on in a very nice room, but understand that in South Sudan, 7.2% of the population have access to modern energy, a modern energy that is highly unreliable. Understand that in Chad, 11% have access to modern energy. And they, both these countries, and that is why I mentioned them, sit on oil and gas resources, and they don't have other things to export. So international solidarity, development assistance, and climate finance will matter too. So the first point, energy transition at home and abroad. And when you buy that electric vehicle, please consider that your old vehicle will probably be sold to Africa and drive for another 25 years. So think about that and consider, therefore, that you have not stopped polluting for the next 25 years when you buy the electric one. That is why I call on states to find ways to pay for electric vehicles so that they cannot continue in circulation. Now, my second point, embrace the circular economy. The economy is cannonballing set in 1960s when we were all thinking about space travel. I wasn't because I was a little girl, but anyway, people were. That we should consider Earth as a spaceship with limited resources, and everything we have has to be with us in that spaceship, and everything we waste, we are taking with us and living with this waste as we hurtle through the atmosphere and through the space. That is how we have to think about planet Earth, and this is why, as we heard ministers say, we have to move from that linear take, make, and waste economy into a circular economy. That's the only way that we can live sustainably on this world. So my second point is drive circularity, live circularity. Yes, refuse and reuse and reduce and recycle, but also refuse. We are over-consuming. My third point is that we have to recognize the universal human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. We all have that right. In these countries, we take it for granted, but everyone has that right. And that, therefore, deals with justice as well. The right to a clean and healthy environment was gavelled in August at the Human Rights Council. That was a big decision. Now we would like to see that gavelled and other places too, so that it gets universally recognized across the world. And 4, we have to be smart about digital technologies. We still talk about it in the environmental world, but we haven't really quite understood the shifts that it will entail. It will entail open data for environmental sustainability. Why is it that Amazon knows what I want to buy before I even know I needed it? But why is it that I cannot find the data of what's happening in my neighborhood or what's happening in my country? These things should be everybody's access, and data should be available so that we have an understanding of the environmental footprint that we make. Much of that footprint is made by the very systems in which we live, the concrete, the iron and steel, and the consumption that we inherently have, even if we didn't take those decisions ourselves. So that's my 4th point, deal with understanding and making environmental data more accessible. And 5, financial systems. The trillions that are out there in our banks, they should really be moving and shifting towards sustainability. And you have a voice there too. You have a pension, you have a bank account. Do think about where that goes and where that sits and whether that money is investing in hydrocarbon and fossil fuel or not. Is it investing in tropical forest degradation through food stocks that you may own, I don't know, or not. So central banks and regulators can help put in place some guardrails around this, and we're very proud at Unep to be working exactly with a large number of banks on this. So friends, as a global organization, Unep will throw everything we have behind these crises. The immediate area of focus are very clear. We are throwing ourselves behind the international negotiations on the new plastic pollution deal, a deal that should be legally binding, go from source to sea, and be fair and just, and should be ready for ratification by 2024, which means everybody needs to get their skates on and get this done. We are also embracing the digital transformation. We've established the World Environment Situation Room, and we're making it better and better. It's still a bit clunky when you go in, you go, what are these people feeling? But it's in construction, so bear with us, but it'll get there. And we are strengthening our science, especially on chemicals. This is something that we need to do in supporting the new panel, the new triplet. And we're very much the work on disasters and conflict, which right now is an issue that is on the forefront. We are strengthening it considerably, and I have gone on record to say that we are proactively engaging, for example, in Ukraine, But we have indeed worked on this for we've been in some 50 conflict or disaster-affected countries. In fact, Mr. Havistu is one of the architects of that work back in his days, and so it is work that remains very critical. But to be frank, Unep has been operating on a shoestring budget. Back in 1972, the founders of Unep foresaw a time when we should have 100 million a year disposed in our environment fund. If we take that into today's dollars, it would be just under 700 million. And today in our environment fund, we have $75 million a year. So we are about 11% of the original vision, but we are working hard with the resources that we have. But we are obviously very grateful to a country like Finland that continues to be a strong donor. So friends, yes, I am dreaming of a better resourced UNEP that is far better equipped on tackling the triple planetary crisis, because with your help, we've already done a lot. But it was with little from the broader global community that we've been able to do that. And I know that we can do so much more. But I also know that there is a willingness and a spirit and an absolute commitment amongst our strongest friends, such as those present here, whether virtually or in the hall. And I know that with the government of Sweden, we have a government of Sweden for the Stockholm conference, as well as the government of Kenya, which is our host, that we have seen how we could raise that up to the broader global awareness. And so I stand before you here in Finland, and I am very, very grateful, because the government of Finland has been a supporter from the start when UNEP was founded, and every year since, knowing that environment, poverty reduction, and development and well-being are core to our very existence. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your visionary keynote and for reminding us of the triple planetary crisis, but also the fact that there are solutions and that Finland has also a role to play to be part of this movement to solve this planetary crisis. So thank you so much. Now I have the pleasure to invite Minister for Foreign Affairs, Pekka Haavisto. He will look at the role of UNEP from a global environmental security perspective. The floor is yours.
Executive Director Inger Andersen, Director General Bruno Oberle, Minister Emma Kari, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to be and speak here today in celebration of UNEP and its 50-year journey. Since its establishment in Stockholm in June 1972, the United Nations Environmental Programme UNEP has been the global authority on environmental issues. I have actually a very personal memory of 1972 conference because I was 14 years old. We were running an environmental club, Vanessa, in our school in Munkkivuori, but only those who were 15 could jump the boat alone and go to Stockholm. So my best friend, Kai Vaara, went to Stockholm. I didn't go, but when he came back, that was the first ever booklet printed on recycled paper that he was bringing with him. And in this environmental club, we were looking the booklet and thinking, this is the future. And this was the future, of course. Over the years, UNEP has made a strong contribution in accelerating transformation towards a more sustainable future. UNEP has been the leader in setting the global environmental agenda, advancing normative frameworks and global multilateral environmental agreements, and promoting sound environmental management for sustainable development. UNEP has been a key driver in helping us all reach the Sustainable Development Goals. Today I want to focus on 3 issues related to UNEP's role in global environmental security. These are food security, water diplomacy, and conflict analysis. First, about the food security. It's increasingly becoming a relevant environment security issue. About 60% of the world's undernourished people live in areas affected by conflict. There is a close connection between the conflicts and hunger. There is also a link between conflicts and degradation of environment. Climate change and environmental degradation serve as threat multipliers to conflict. 14 of the 25 countries that are considered the most vulnerable to environmental degradation and climate change are also currently experiencing conflict and violence. As such, strengthening food security and environmental protection is an investment in global peace and security. Currently, the war in Ukraine is adding a new troubling dimension to the global hunger. Until March, Ukraine was feeding the world with its supplies of food. In April, UN had to distribute food and cash to more than 3 million Ukrainians. Russia's invasion of its neighbor has effectively ended its food exports. Price increases of up to 30% for staple foods threaten people in countries across Africa and the Middle East. Finland is deeply concerned about the global rise in hunger. And of course, the drought in countries like Pakistan and India is adding to this problem. We also want to express our full support to the work done by UN and UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres to find a way for the food exports out from Ukraine. In order to break the deadly dynamic of conflict and hunger, it's clear that we need to invest in political solutions. We have to find ways to end conflicts and prevent new ones to start, and that is, of course, what the whole UN is about. However, we also need to invest into equitable management of natural resources, environmental protection, and building of resilience. Addressing environmental risks are essential for security strategy. Unep has a significant role to play here. Also, Unep's membership in the Steering Committee on the Global Crisis Response on Food, Energy and Finance allows Unep's essential environmental expertise to feed into the policy recommendations and work of the group. Finland's approach is to support the improvement of food security, especially by promoting the organization of small farmers and developing sustainable agricultural production and food value chains and land management. In addition, Finland will strengthen the food, water, energy, forest approach to achieve food security. Then some words about the water diplomacy. Finland, through its Finnish Waterway strategy, strongly advocates for water and peace theme, including water diplomacy and transboundary water cooperation. Water diplomacy combines foreign policy and preventive peace mediation with natural resources know-how, focusing on the water resources under changing climate conditions. Water diplomacy as preventive peace mediation is a key priority in foreign policy as well as the Center for Peace Mediation in our Ministry for Foreign Affairs. Finland's water diplomacy network brings together comprehensive water expertise and peace mediation expertise. Finland has first-hand experience of complex but successful transboundary cooperation, including in the Nile Basin, Mekong region, and Central Asia. We actively promote regional cooperation in the Baltic Sea, Barents Sea, and Arctic regions. Both global conventions on transboundary waters have been initiated by Finland, the 92 UNECE Water Convention, so-called Helsinki Convention, and the 1997 UN Watercourses Convention. Climate change magnifies existing pressures on scarce natural resources, especially water. A great majority of all climate-related impacts are felt through changes in the water cycle, which cause, for example, extreme weather events, droughts and floods. Water-related crises can fuel or escalate conflicts or undermine progress made towards sustaining peace. We appreciate that over the past years, the UN system has been addressing more profoundly the water and peace-related issues, such as mediation of water-related disputes. The UN has developed its approach to the water and peace theme, one indication of which is that Unep was selected as the UN entity to be a technical advisor to the African Union in the River Nile's Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam GERD dispute. For myself and Finland, it has been a privilege to cooperate and coordinate water diplomacy efforts and expertise that our organizations have provided to parties and international community in the GERD dispute. The UN Water Conference in March 23, so next year, shall be the opportunity to develop a UN system-wide approach on water and we believe that establishment of special envoy on water will be a concrete outcome towards that direction. For the conference, our key priorities are water and peace, human rights to water, and sanitation. We would like to see the international community move forward in defining concept of water security. The year 22 leading up to the water conference is perhaps the most important time in advancing the global water agenda in decades. And then finally, a couple of words about the Unep's work in conflict analysis and conflict areas. Unep has a very important role in the assessment of and development of the repair of environmental damage caused by conflicts. I had the privilege to see how this work started many years ago, 1999, actually after the Kosovo conflict. That time, Executive Director Klaus Töpfer called me and asked if I can help a little bit with assessing the environmental damage done by the Kosovo war. I traveled to Geneva, and Klaus Töpfer hired me to work for Unep, and then I gave him a call that I have found out that there is no working room and there is no budget line. And he said, well, that's only a small problem, you just organize it and then go on. And 1 week from that, I found myself in Belgrade, actually I think the first ever UN agency after the war, working there, and then everybody was a little bit surprised what the hell Unep is doing here after the conflict. You can come and count the butterflies a little bit later, and we of course explained that we are concerned about the pollution caused by the bombings, we are concerned about the river Danube effects, we are concerned river effects to the Black Sea, and so forth and so forth, and then step by step we could start our work. And that work actually then continued not only in other parts of the Western Balkans, but then in Afghanistan, occupied Palestinian territories, Iraq, Liberia, Sudan, and so on. It was a very interesting moment to look at the real environmental consequences of the conflict. Simultaneous to this work, Unep has taken part in the larger advancing of environmental security, for example, by analyzing the natural resource factors' roles in conflicts. In addition, Unep has helped develop environmental governance in post-conflict countries. This work requires extensive background research and research cooperation, which in turn has enabled scientific knowledge to be utilized beneficially. Unep actors have been in active roles in the Environmental Peacebuilding Association that was founded in 2018. This association seeks to identify promising research avenues and best policy practices, as well as foster exchange of knowledge and data. Regarding Unep's post-conflict assessments, Unep must be commended for developing the instrument further by adapting it to fit different contexts. However, wide-scale environmental damage analyses remain important and relevant. They must, however, be linked to a comprehensive plan and financing of how the damages will begin to be repaired. Actually, when we developed the work of the post-conflict unit in Geneva, we of course came to the conclusion that environmental aspects are very important in 3 different phases of the conflict. Actually, prior to the conflict, you can argue against the conflict breaking up also with the environmental arguments. You can try to prevent the conflict through those. During the conflict, you have to protect the environment. You have to act so that there would be a minimum damage to the environment. And after the conflict, environmental issues can use as a peace-building tool, cross-border tool, and so forth. So environmental aspects can be used in every time and every part of the conflict. And then finally, a couple of conclusions. Unep is well placed to give support and communicate about different perceptions that exist about the relationship between environment and security. Unep has a special role specifically in producing and disseminating of environmental knowledge to advance a larger security as a whole. Finland commends the work Unep is doing and has been doing for the past 50 years. We wish you all the best for the future in all your work. You can count on our strong partnership and support. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister for Foreign Affairs, Pekka Haavisto. And now I have the honor to invite our second guest, of today, Director General of Iucn, Mr. Bruno Oberle, and we'll hear his remarks on the common achievements of Iucn and Unep for global biodiversity. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear guests. Iucn and Unep have a common history, a common understanding. And these make easier to speak to each other, but it makes a bit challenging having speeches at the same place on the same topic, because the risk of repeating everything is very high. So I will deviate from the original speech that I have prepared on this topic, and I try to reflect on parallel elements in this history. And I remember back to 1972, when in the Stockholm Conference, Unep was created. At the same moment, one important booklet was published, The Limit to Growth. It was a breakthrough. It was one of the first piece of analysis that were using the revolutionary technology of computers that allowed to analyze 5 parameters in parallel, taking into account the algorithms that bound these different parameters, and demonstrated that the pathway on which humanity was in terms of population, consumption of natural resources, producing of negative impact on the environment would inevitably lead into a crash, into a big crisis that came to expression in the population curve dropping in a few years from the top population to almost zero. It was a shock for many decision makers. It was for me a revealing moment. I was tasked to read these books when I was preparing my baccalaureate. I was tasked to read the book and make a summary and present it to my classmate because of my bad behavior. It was a punishment over weekend to read this book. For me, it revealed me a world in which I decided to dive and spend all my professional career. These curves, these alarming curves, were criticized, where the economic analysis behind was not deep enough. The mathematics was not complex enough. Not all elements were captured, but we are still on these pathways. And this is a very bad news, an extremely bad news. It is precise that IPCC, IPBS, IRP, and in future the new scientific body that will focus on pollution will deepen, broaden, and precise this knowledge. But we are on that pathways. I remember I was in primary class. I remember trying to understand what it means. Switzerland, I'm Swiss, has 3.6 million inhabitants, and the world 3.7 billion. And I tried to figure out what it means, this huge number, 3.7 billion. Today, it is during my life. Switzerland has more than 8 million inhabitants, and the world more than 8 billion. So we doubled the population in the course of my life. I hope in the course of part of my life. At the same time, the capacity to buy, the capacity to spend, the income per capita was multiplied by 8. Taking account inflation and everything, this is between 5 and 8. There are several numbers in the literature. So double as much persons are consuming 5 up to 8 times more each one in average. Impact is function of population, affluence, and technology. This is it was also a relation, a mathematical relation that was published in those years. Of course, it is not to be understood as a precise description of facts, but it is a relation, a proportionality. What we are doing, the impact we have, is proportional to amount of humans, the consumption of humans, and the technology we use. The more people, the more impact, the more consumption, the more impact, the better technology, the less impact. It's a race between population and consumption on one side and better technology on the other side. Technology is evolving. We went on the moon in these 50 years. We have developed computer. I remember when I bought my first Macintosh SE with the amazing capacity of 2 kilobyte RAM to run the calculation of my PhD. I was extremely proud. Then we developed the web. I remember Diadora, the first program coming directly from Geneva, from CERN to our university, and trying to understand. We developed on the back of that Facebook, and now we are entering the metaverse. Technology has evolved a lot, but from 4 billion up to 8 billion, 5 up to 8 times more consumption per capita, has consequences even with this technology. Before 50 years ago, we were consuming 30 gigatons raw material we extracted from the planet. Metals, non-metallic minerals, fossil fuels, organic matters. Today, we use 90 gigatons. In 50 years, 2060, the projection tell us we will use 160. So we are not stopping. We are not plafonning at one moment. We will continue raising, growing our consumption. This is logic. We have objective. We have the Sustainable Development Goal we want to achieve. We have large population nations that still have to create their infrastructure. The same boom of infrastructure we have seen in China in the last year. Between 2018 and 2020, China consumed the same amount of cement that the United States in all the last century. We will see the same coming to Africa and then and to India. So this will not stop, it will continue. And this has, it has impacts. Only the production and the first phase of refinement of natural resources is the cause of 1/3 of pollutions, is the cause of more than 50% of greenhouse gases emission. It is the cause of up to 80–90% of biodiversity losses. We are more, we consume more, we extract more from the planet, and we produce impact. We have to act, and we know science tells us we have the means. And I will not repeat in detail what Ingrid already said. Circularity, renewable energy are key. Technologies on data are an important tool. I will focus on biodiversity because being the Director General of the International Unit for Conservation of Nature, the Dasgupta report tells us very clear the root cause of depletion of biodiversity is the fact that we waste biodiversity because it doesn't have a price. We should take less and we should reinvest more. Taking less means, for example, creating preserved areas. You know that in the coming CBD COP discussions, one of the central topics will be what is the part of the planet that we want to dedicate and to preserve for nature. On one side, on the other side, reinvesting in nature means restoring nature where we have impacted in the past. It will not go without obstacles, without problem. 30%, what is the number, the most quoted number, 30% protected area on this planet will mean we will have to reflect how to change our agriculture, how to change our forestry to make sure that we can produce food, feed, fibers, and at the same time protect nature. And all this will cost money, and we will have the same discussion we had in climate. Who will pay for what on this planet, under which condition? CBDR, common responsibility, but common but differentiated responsibility. These discussions are coming to us, and they are very important discussions, and at the same time, we are taken by other challenges. I could say, if it would not be, let's say, we are distracted by other things like pandemics, like armed conflict. I know that to say we are distracted by armed conflict, it's a bit provocative and a problematic formulation. But in reality, if you take 2 steps back and you reflect at this long-term evolution that humanity is going, it is a distraction. The core question it is, how do we manage this planet? How do we manage this small ecosystem in which we are living? Recently, I was in a radio discussion, and for technical reason, I was mixed with a discussion on inflation, the problems of inflation, and the problems of food supply. And in between, I was asked what were my thoughts related to these 2 other. And it was, in a way, instinctive for me to think of the Titanic. I'm sure that on the Titanic, people were occupied occupied by many things. In the first class, they were probably reflecting what type of clothes they have to choose for the gala dinner. The captain was organizing the gala dinner. In the 3rd class, people were upset because the room were small, no air and hot temperature. In the machine rooms, there were technical problems, I'm pretty sure. And we know, matter of fact, that during that night, several messages came to the Titanic telling them, take care, a group of icebergs is on your route. They simply didn't have time and didn't have management attention to focus on this very fact, because they were occupied in managing many other problems. And we know what was the results. We can solve the problem. We have to focus on this, on the central core of how to steer this planet in the next years. We have not another 50 years to solve the problem. And we need institutions that take care of this and help us refocusing on the central question. Unep is one of these institutions. It is the most important institution on this planet to helping us focusing on the central question for the survival of our species. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and thank you also for underlining the importance of sustainable consumption of resources and in order to achieve the biodiversity and climate goals and many other environmental objectives that we are committed to. So our last speaker before a small break and before the panel discussion, we will have our youth delegate Alli Pyykkö here with us. Alli was also with us in Nairobi for UNEA 5.2 meeting and in Stockholm Plus 50, and now she will inform or provide us some ideas for UNEP's future work. The floor is yours, Alli.
Thank you so much. Dear Executive Director of Unep and Director General of Iucn, and everybody here present. I'm honored to speak in front of this audience. My name is Alli Pylkkö and I'm the Youth Delegate for Nature and Biodiversity in Finland. I'm going to talk about 3 themes as ideas for Unep's future. Firstly, the rights of nature and the need for ecocide law. Secondly, replacement of GDP by the donut economics. And lastly, the importance of inclusive decision-making processes when it comes to nature. We need to redefine our relationship with nature. Our current way of seeing the relationship with nature has led us to a climate crisis that will kill millions of people during the coming decades. We are also surfing on the most massive and most rapid extinction wave the globe ever seen that will drown the stable societies. It is clear that we need big and radical changes in our relationship with nature. First thing we could do to better the relationship with nature is to recognize the rights of nature. We have to recognize the nature as a juridical person. As a juridical person, nature will have the ability to sue another legal entity, such as a state or a corporation, for redestruction of nature. This would protect nature better because the law protects one better if one has legally recognized status. On this day, the best level of nature protection, at least in the Finnish law, is when the nature destruction has a harm on the landowner's interest, such as on the price of the piece of the land or the quality of that piece of the land. The status of a juridical person will protect, for example, forests or rivers or lakes, even if there was no direct harm caused to a human being. The origins of the idea of nature status as a juridical person is in indigenous peoples' activism. I suggest that this idea would be adopted in our normal laws and regulations. Related to the nature rights, we need criminalization of ecocide in international law. The status of juridical person will increase the impact of nature protection when ecocide, the nature destruction, is criminalized in international law. Secondly, we need the donut. We need donut economics. We need to update the indicators of economies to this day. GDP is outdated when it comes to illustrating human well-being in the Nordic countries. Economic growth doesn't correlate with human well-being anymore and hasn't done so for some decades now in the Nordic countries. Furthermore, GDP fails to tackle the planetary crisis. There is no significant evidence from research of any growing economy that would have been able to reduce climate emissions and natural resources broadly and permanently. I'm sorry for the decision makers who has to deal with it. I get that it is an easy solution to tackle the planetary crisis, this economic growth with a green twist, but it is very unlikely that the decoupling economic growth from natural resources will ever happen. The donut economics can help us to rethink our relationship with nature. The donut is a model to measure how societies meet the needs of all within the means of the living planet. As you know, the donut consists of 2 circles. Inside, there is this social foundation to ensure that no one is left falling short on life essentials, and outside is the circle to ensure that we are living within the planetary boundaries. Between these sets of boundaries lies a donut-shaped space that is both ecologically safe and socially just. I want to live inside the donut. Lastly, in order to get there, we truly have to include the youth and indigenous people in decision-making processes at every level. This way, we will ensure the meaningful and democratic engagement of all. These groups are not only the ones most strongly affected by the triple planetary crisis, but also have valuable ideas, knowledge, and willingness to act. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alli. Some food for thought for all of us. Okay, now we are a little bit behind the schedule, but we have small time for any questions. The ministers have had to leave, but we have Inger Andersen and Bruno Oberle still here. If there are any emerging urgent questions here in the room or online, nothing online. Go ahead, Aleksi Neuvonen.
Yes, Aleksi Neuvonen from Think Tank.
Just a minute, just to ensure that everybody hears.
Yes, thank you. Aleksi Neuvonen from Think Tank Demos Helsinki. I would like to pick up the issue on ecocide. What do you think? How would that move forward, initiative that is now spreading globally? What are the kind of prospects? I understand that's going to be a kind of a, not hopefully decades-long walk through the changing legislation in different countries, but what would be a kind of a, let's say, a 10-year prognosis on how we could kind of move forward in making that type of kind of a, let's say, cultural shift within the legislation of nation states?
You know, I arrived in Stockholm knowing that there was this very good conversation around this. But then I'm old enough, I was 14 too when Stockholm took place, to know that in the speech of Olof Palme, he used that very word, ecocide. That's the first time that I think we heard it in the mouth of a politician, certainly the first time we heard it in the mouth of a prime minister. He was speaking about the herbicide bombing in Vietnam and Laos by the Americans during the war. That is how he described it. He didn't mention that, but everyone understood in his speech because he also spoke about herbicide bombing. So we know that his reference was indeed, he was a strong person on peace, as we know. So it's very interesting that 50 years later in the conference that marks that words was everywhere in the corridors. There was some discussion, can we get the words environmental crimes and crimes against the environment into the summary of the two co-chairs? That didn't happen. And so I have to accept that that didn't happen. But I do believe that this word, or the words around environmental crime, crimes against the environment, which is sort of beginning to taste of the same, will eventually walk its way into the quote-unquote UN vocabulary. How does that happen? Any number of ways. You've seen now that the human right to a healthy, clean, and sustainable environment has walked its way into the UN vocabulary because the Council, the Human Rights Council, gavelled that in August of 2021. It's there now. You've seen now that nature-based solutions have walked its way into the United Nations vocabulary because of a resolution that was gavelled at UNEA 5.2 just this March. So whilst these words have existed elsewhere, and certainly nature-based solutions framed in Iucn, but now also part of the UN vocabulary, it's very interesting to see how these things happen. It takes a movement. So I think that it was very interesting to see the many conversations happening in Stockholm around this word, ecocide. It is not a new word. It's a 50-year-old word, stated in the mouth of a prime minister, no less, a distinguished and well-regarded prime minister. So I would expect, although I cannot predict the future, that those who see environmental crime and crimes against the environment as critical that they will continue their work, and that eventually, indeed, it will walk into the UN vocabulary. There can be no doubt that, as Olof Palme said, and I'm paraphrasing, but I've said the words so many times but I may get them wrong, in his speech he says, when the guns stop, the environment is still the victim. Essentially saying that it will take years to repair, and that's exactly what Foreign Minister Pekka Haavisto was speaking about. And so that's the best I can do to reflect on that. But I welcome this conversation and look forward to seeing where it will take us. Thank you.
Mr. Oberle, you want to just...
Yes, I can take the other face of the coin. So ecocide, on the other side, the right for nature. Creating right for nature would mean creating a new legal person that by the simple fact to exist and by the simple fact that it has own rights will limit the rights of humans. So this is a political tension, creating this right for nature, we create a new limit for the rights of humans. This is, let's say, the political discussion behind. To pour this into legal concept, this is an ongoing discussion. There are already countries that knows this concept in their legislation, mainly in South America, but also in some other countries, New Zealand, Ireland, have elements of this discussion. So this is also an ongoing discussion. And the last element, it is the institutional part of the discussion. Once it will be recognized who will be the speaker of this right, because nature doesn't have a voice itself. So we'll have to create institutions that speaks in the name of these rights and contest when these rights are heard. So it's a very tough political discussion, but an important one.
Since we are sort of soldiers in arms together here, Iucn has long recognized the rights of the environment, which is very interesting. So in that space, the rights of the environment, that the environment has these rights, is recognized within the Iucn community and significant. It hasn't walked into the multilateral state-based vocabulary. But Ali, thank you, because you spoke really well and eloquently about this. And I think that the issue of, and again, you know, we've recognized that the human rights to a safe and healthy and sustainable environment be opposite, or not the opposite, but I think there are these three dimensions on international law that I picked up in the atmosphere in Stockholm, ecocide, and they're all linked, but the ecocide conversation, the rights of the environment, which has a consequence, and also the dimension of intergenerational justice in an environmental sense and in a planetary security sense. Then there was the issue around, also in Stockholm in the air, a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. I did have a discussion with my boss, the Secretary General. He goes, we don't have time for a treaty. We know a treaty is too slow. So let's just get on with the process and decarbonize. But I just wanted to mention that these were sort of things that were floating and healthily floating and causing good debate. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that discussion on this topic will continue, certainly. I think we need to continue because we are a bit behind the schedule. What will happen now is that we will have a 4-minute break. You can stretch your leg. I believe there is some coffee, but please come back because the panel discussion will start at 11:15 here in this room. So please be back soon. Ehkä pannaan tuo ovi kiinni. So if we give one more minute for people to come in, we are ready to start our panel discussion on the science policy role of Unep. Yes. One more minute for people to come in. Oh. Great. Thank you. Right, so welcome our panelists, first of all. We have 4 excellent panelists. Unfortunately, Climate Ambassador Jan Wahlberg from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was not able to join us, so we have 4 panelists. And starting from the right over there, we have Director General Leena Ylämononen from the Ministry of the Environment. Then we have Director General Leif Schulman from the Finnish Environment Institute. We have Head of Group Credit Risk Control, Jukka Vesala from Nordea. And we have Director Mari Pantsar from the Finnish Innovation Fund, Sitra. And my name is Tanja Suni. I'm the Research Director here at the Ministry of the Environment. So we have about half an hour to talk about the science policy role of Unep. Just to recap very quickly what we heard in the morning, and if some of you are just joining us, since its creation, Unep has worked closely with its member states, almost 200 of them, and other stakeholders to address many of the world's most pressing environmental challenges. It has played a leading role in 15 multilateral environmental agreements, among them, for instance, the Montreal Protocol that was mentioned in the beginning of today on ozone-depleting substances, the Minamata Convention on Mercury Pollution, the UNFCCC Convention on Climate Change, and the CBD Convention on Biological Diversity. Unep has also had a critical role in advancing the environmental dimension of the Agenda 2030 with its Sustainable Development Goals. In addition to the agreements, Unep supports policy with science by launching platforms to synthesize science, and it has, for instance, launched the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, and the Intergovernmental Platform for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, IPBES. Unep also produces countless scientific reports of its own on the state of the environment through the Global Environment Outlook, the GEO series. Now, considering all these different ways that Unep works, I'd like to start by asking Leena from the Ministry of the Environment, considering these international conventions and the scientific reports, how do you feel about these different operating models in terms of ministries? How would you describe their effectiveness and value from your point of view?
Thank you, and very pleased to be here. Good morning, everybody. I think it's quite evident that for the governments and for the ministries, therefore, the legally binding multilateral environmental agreements are enormously important. They are also very important for the EU member states, like Finland, because via these global environmental agreements, we can actually also advance the EU politics. So when it's legally binding, when everybody commits, and there are clear measures also how to report and follow, evidently that's very effective and important. Having said that, of course also the science policy reports that UNEP is producing, it is of course important that our decisions, including the MEA agreements, are based on sound science. And therefore, these global reports developed by the scientific community in the whole world, they are enormously important as well. Mm-hmm. My colleagues are just now in Bonn in preparing for the next COP meeting for the climate change. And they are eagerly waiting also the synthesis report and the gap report produced by UNEP, because these do matter. And nowadays, especially in the climate change negotiations, they are given quite a prominent role at the beginning of the negotiations, and they do set the scene and the atmosphere of the negotiations. So they are both very important. And of course, then there are so many other reports as well, and they do also matter for the national decision making, for the bodies like the European Union. They do get the attention. We can improve that, but maybe we come later to that in the discussion. Thank you.
Sure. A small follow-up question, actually.
How do you see these environmental reports are received outside the environmental sphere in government? You mentioned the CAP agreement and all those, or the funding instrument, but how do you see, are they recognized, are they seen, are they given the attention they need?
That's a good question, because of course not only the reports need to be translated into the language of the different nations. 6 UN languages is not enough. They may need to be, translated into the language of the national languages, but also in the language of, for example, economics. I think they need some kind of translation to different groups of people and decision makers. Or the conflict resolution people, the diplomats may need a bit different policy briefs than the environmentalists. So it is also about how to turn the findings and the synthesis, conclusions and recommendations into the practical and let's say messages that can be understood really by those professionals then using them. Thank you.
This is actually a great bridge to go directly to Jukka Vesala from Nordea. I'm wondering, Nordea is part of the Unep Finance Initiative. This is a partnership between Unep and the global financial sector, and it tries to mobilize the private sector finance for sustainable development. I understand this finance initiative actually worked with more than 400 banks, insurers and investors. And I'd like to ask you, following from Leena's point on turning these messages into the language of, for instance, economics, do you feel that this finance initiative and UNEP is able to convey the sense of urgency of these environmental crises to the economic sector? And how would you actually describe Nordea's work with this initiative?
Yes, thank you. I think this initiative has been really influential. The UNEP sorry, now I forgot
the finance initiative.
The finance initiative, sorry for that. The finance initiative has been really influential in helping banks to translate this research into the sort of business environment understanding, and then also understanding the climate-related risks. But it also helped banks to coordinate action, also sort of look at the different methodologies, and then also set these targets and create this kind of commitment and responsibility across the banking sector. And that's quite important. I mean, as you said, Nordea has been one of the sort of banks that were there in the beginning, setting the principles for responsible banking, and then also these commitments to the climate action. And then what Nordea has also done itself is that it has set quite ambitious climate targets. So we have focused a lot on green lending, boosting green lending across all the different activities that we have. But then also we have set, I think, as one of the few banks, these kind of quantitative targets that we wish to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions financing by 40 to 50% by 2030, and we are quite actively working on that. I mean, if we speak about the energy sector, power production, that is really central as I see it now. And also banks, especially here in the Nordics, can be quite important in boosting the sort of innovation. So Nordic companies can be having a bigger weight than what the Nordic economies have, because we have quite a lot of innovation here, startups that create solutions that help creating this kind of transition that we need into the renewable energy sources. I mean, we have seen that power production and energy is creating around 40% of the greenhouse gas emissions. And then this is growing because there is such a big increase in the need of energy. And now we have this additional issue that we need to replace the Russian energy in Europe with the European energy production or some alternative sources. So there's clearly a need to focus on this. In the EU, the EU governments have had a very helpful joint effort in financing this transition also together going to the market and getting joint financing for the first time. But I think we all know that you need to have banks in it, because the financing need of this, especially when you talk about this kind of very capital intensive creation of new types of energy sources and innovation, that is really where you need to have a lot of bank financing, and we think that we can really play a big role on this in the Nordics. I mean, it's also a matter of, I would say, steering the approach by the banks here, because, for instance, we have made it quite clear that we would not be financing any more coal-related energy production. We have said that we will not engage in financing any projects where there is more than 5% dependency on coal. And we have also committed that by 2030 we will not have anything business anymore with the customers that have something to do with coal. So getting this kind of banks having these policies, exclusions, moving towards this renewable energy sources, less greenhouse gas intensive operations. And that, I think it was important that was also mentioned that there's a role for the regulators. So that if one bank tries to do this alone, there's always the risk that somebody else is then picking up that customer, and still we don't get the improvement that we need. And maybe the last thing to mention, what I think is really central here, is that we try to support as well as we can customers having their transitional plans. So that customers who might be dependent on old technologies, that they have the sort of transitional plans, how they steer their business to the greener technologies. And we have actually said that we expect to have 90% of our customers by 25 already having these transitional plans. So this is also another area where maybe the regulators can help pushing banks to this direction. In a way, we try to set that sort of the leadership here in the Nordics, but still having a sort of the European and global regulatory community pushing towards this type of bank actions, exclusions, and focusing on transition, and trying to select those customers that have these credible transitional plans to be the ones who get bank financing, even maybe on a more favorable terms than the ones who are financing, let's say, the old technology. So there are many aspects of this process where the banks can really push the economy towards this direction.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, a similar type of question that I asked from Leena Ylä-Mononen, I'd like to ask you also. The Unep 6th Global Environment Outlook report recommends that these environmental issues are best addressed when dealt with in conjunction with related economic and social issues. And Minister Haavisto mentioned in his speech that environmental degradation or, for instance, water-related crises serve as multipliers for conflict. Now, you work with credit risks. Is this something that Unep has been able to kind of convey to your sector? Probably you are getting the same message from several sources, but this kind of idea that the environmental issues are no longer just a concern of the environmental sector, but of societal conflict, economic well-being, and all these things. So
yeah, very much so, because in a way my job at Nordea is managing credit risk, as you say. So in a way, what I need to do, what is my responsibility anyway, is to look at what are the things that are driving the risk. So that's one important aspect. It's not only about us wanting to be a sustainable bank and contributing to the society, but we also need to worry about what is our risk. And what we are doing is that we look at these different drivers, like the biodiversity loss or the water shortage issue that are coming from the research, or the climate issues, which are really important factors driving the credit risk. So how are companies affected by the climate, global warming, what type of businesses will not be viable anymore, and then also the physical risks created by sea level increases or created by sort of period of drought. There are different sectors affected.
Yes.
The collateral that we have is affected. One example is maybe a home that is subject to a mortgage that is sitting very close to the sea level. And these risks can be, quite far ahead still, but we really need to take them account. So having this research supports us, and then we need to have this kind of a translation of that into the risk world. And we have been actually working quite well with the local university as well here, both the Aalto University and the Helsinki University, and also to have a next generation of risk professionals joining us that are looking at this research that's coming from Unep, for instance, and then bringing that in. What does it mean for the Nordic economies? What does it mean for the risk? And also bringing in new data sources, so to manage this also on a quantitative basis, because we need to be able to establish a link from this, what is going on, and then what is the risk on the balance sheet.
Absolutely, and actually continuing on the topic of risk, Leif Schulman, you represent the leadership in research, and Mari Pantsar in foresight and future studies, and mega trends and things like that in Sitra. So I'd actually like to continue on the topic of risks with you. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said in 2021 that the triple planetary crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss and pollution is our #1 existential threat. And it has brought the world to a crossroads, and they actually published a synthesis report on this topic called Making Peace with Nature last year. So I was wondering what you consider is the significance of such assessment reports that highlight such critical emerging risks. Research often works a little bit in silos, like governing also, and administration. Sitra, on the other hand, tends to look at such comprehensive risks. So I was wondering if you think that such reports by Unep and other international organizations get the attention they need in research and also in national action. Maybe if Mari, you want to start, and then we can move on to Leif.
Okay, so thank you for the excellent question. So I believe that these science-based UN reports, they really are utmost important in global awareness raising, but unfortunately, as we have also discussed today, this has been painfully slow, considering how long these reports have been done since Stockholm Conference in 1972. And I have even started to think that whether our economic system is able to change only through crisis. So we have been knowing the facts for decades, but unfortunately the action is still missing. So maybe we also must feel the impacts. But of course now we are feeling the impacts of the climate crisis almost everywhere in the world, also here in Finland, so that really should be a wake-up call, and we should be prepared for the risks. So we can no longer say that we didn't know.
Yeah.
And in Finland, these UN science-based reports have received increasingly attention among policymakers and also in media. And this is all very good. But I believe that in order to trigger real change, people must understand what it means for the economy, what it means for the daily lives, and what it means also for the well-being of the society. And therefore at Sitra we have tried to, I would say, contextualize and interpret these reports by answering the question, what does this mean for our economy and what does this mean for our well-being? So we have tried to do somewhat the same that was done in the Stern report in 2006 and also Dasgupta review last year. So kind of explaining what are the economic consequences of these risks. And I believe that the finance sector really plays a key role here when we are talking about tackling the risks related to planetary crises. And one very good initiative is the Coalition of Finance Ministers on Climate Action. So that has not been mentioned today. So that coalition was established in 2018, and we, Sitra, had a pleasure together with the government of Finland be involved also in that preparation. And still today, Sitra is one of the institutional partners of the coalition, and we have provided some reports and studies for the coalition. The latest was related to carbon neutral state budget. And actually today, the coalition is publishing a report on nature risks. And that is really great, because if we can involve the finance ministers to address also the triple environmental crisis, so that will be a big step forward.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I thought of those reports in relation to science from actually two, or in relation to research, from 2 points of view. There is, on one hand, the setting of the research agenda, and on the other hand, knowledge transfer or build-up of awareness. I will start from a personal reflection. When I was a youngster back in the 1980s and thought of what I want to do with my life, I decided that I want to study biology, because I was interested in what we then spoke about, environmental problems. And I thought that as a biologist I would be able to somehow take part in solving them. And then later on I understood bitterly that wasn't at all the case. I should have studied environmental science. But then still later on I've understood that no matter what I study or what I do research in, it doesn't really matter, because I'm not able to change anything in the world by just doing research. So we need a kind of a feedback loop, or you could call it a positive spiral in setting the research agenda. And there has to be feedback between the researchers and organizations like Unep, decision makers. And again, it goes back to researchers. And that's how we build up, the understanding on what we need to know. Researchers are very good at identifying problems or issues, but they're not very good at interpreting them into what should be done or how it should be done. So we definitely do need synthesizing reports. Organizations, bodies, be it on the national level or on the global level, that gather the information and make policy-relevant interpretations. But it doesn't stop there. But then also it then goes back, feeds back into the research community. Because always when you do a synthesis report, there are open questions, there are gaps, there are things, you point towards things that we don't yet know enough about. And so that feeds into what the researchers start researching. And again, we build up knowledge. But then there is the question about knowledge transfer. I mean, this is quite a nice, in the best case, a nice positive spiral between researchers, interpretations, decision makers, and so on. But quite often, the greater public is left outside unless you interpret what is going on. And that's where my second personal reflection comes in. I've worked on the interface between science and society in various roles throughout my career. And I've spent a lot of time thinking of how you convey scientific messages to people who are not familiar with how they come about, i.e. not familiar with the scientific process. Be it, kindergarten kids or their parents or anyone outside your field that you want to try to interpret your field to. And in that area, these reports are also extremely important because they summarize, they simplify or they condense scientific messages, they make executive summaries which are read by the press, which then convey them to the general audience, increasingly, of course, through social media. So although we may have a build-up of knowledge without that interpretation, we won't have action without that transfer of knowledge into society. So, sorry to speak a bit too long, but in summary, I think these global organizations with their global reports are extremely important. We could not make progress without them.
Yes, thank you. I personally find that too in my role as a research director. It's a backbone that we can kind of rely on in these often very difficult questions. Lena, you wanted to comment?
No, I wanted to react on what Leif and also others have been saying, and on how indeed we can even better use these marvelous reports in Finland. And yes, media plays a role in turning these thick reports into understandable messages, but also we otherwise need also, I think, real discussion with the civil society, with different actors on the findings and what do they mean here in Finland. So, and also that then in the other countries. But also it is important they are global reports, because it is such an essential understanding that we have really a global crisis. These are not like regional or national crises. These are really global and existential, as one has said already several times in this event as well. So that we, a small nation in Finland, has to understand what is our role in this whole combating climate change or indeed taking care of the biodiversity. And then what you said, I think, Tanya, also yourself, how to more and more stop looking one problem at a time in silos, but really looking how these play together and why is it actually much more complex than we thought first to also then find the right solutions, because we have to take care that our solutions do not harm the other objectives, environmental objectives. Thanks.
Thank you. That's actually a point that was highlighted in a recent report by the Finnish Environment Institute and the Forum for Environmental Knowledge on the use of these international reports, that one of the problems is that decision makers have to face interlinking issues, but often the reports only tackle one point or one issue. So this, for instance, this new triple crisis assessment by Unep is probably a very good step forward. Now, a brief comment from Iucn, and then we have only 5 minutes left, so I'd like to leave you with one final question, so please.
Yeah, just one additional point on this question about translating this understanding and research to our economy. I think the large companies, they are already well into the questions. And then those companies that are these sort of startups that I mentioned that invest in renewable energy sources, for instance. But then the problem is that the sort of pretty large sector of the small and medium-sized companies who don't have the resources to sort of even understand what is the climate impact of their activities. And there we can, as banks, help them. But then also I would find it quite useful if we had in our economy, in our marketplace, providers that help these companies doing this and understanding their impact and how they should sort of modify their business plans. I mean, take for instance a small company in the transport sector. It's not so difficult to calculate what is the carbon footprint if we know what is the type of fleet that they have, where do they drive. But then having somebody helping them to do that would be quite. And then also we get as lenders better information. So we are doing that, but I think we lack in the Nordics this kind of service providers who sort of help these SME companies to understand what is their impact. They might want to understand it, but they just don't have the resources.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Thank you very much. So one final question. I really liked the Unep youth delegate Alli Pylkkö's talk about these new ideas for Unep, and I was wondering whether you see Unep as a source of new ways of thinking. And she mentioned things such as ecocide, a legal status for nature, and the donut economy, among other things. And I was wondering if I could get just a brief comment on all of you, first starting with Lena on legislation. Do you see that such new ideas can actually trickle down from Unep as such, or do they have to go through, let's say, the Finnish Environment Institute or through Sitra or through the finance sector in order to become credible for you in legislation? And do you see ecocide or a legal status for nature coming into Finnish legislation anytime soon?
Well, the latter part, I don't dare to bet. I think it would need change in our constitution, and that takes time. So, but I mean, it is very important that this is discussed, and thanks, Ali, for bringing that up. But it was also new for me that this term has been used already 50 years ago in Stockholm, when the whole sort of environmental global agreement and governance started. So yes, I think Unep still and will have a very strong role in these new concepts, bringing these up. But I think Inger very clearly also meant and explained that this requires the agreement by the governments. It is the governments who agree, and whatever we need and want to have in the legally binding text for binding the nations, they have to agree to that between themselves. But I mean, it has to come by bringing the issues up, by having different events, by putting it finally in some of the resolutions, and there it goes. But it is so important that we also, yes, look at the legislative side, and the multilateral environmental agreements play an enormously important role in the whole issue of environmental protection. Thank you.
Thank you. So from the scientific reports to the international agreements and then to national legislation. Thank you very much. And then 1 minute for each of you. So Leif, go ahead.
Yeah, I also commend Ms. Pylke for her comments or thoughts. I would actually would like to pick the donut economy aspect or thought. Obviously, it's not a new idea, but there's a lot to do on how to actually implement it. And one of the many things that we need to think about is the sufficient and correct data to actually assess whether we are within the donut. Well, that goes for any sustainability goal. We need data, and currently we are becoming very aware, or have become very aware, of the severity of the biodiversity crisis, but we lack a lot of data there still. We don't even always know what kind of data we should collect to be able to measure reaching targets and so on. So that might not be kind of a new groundbreaking thought presented by Unep, but Unep could do a lot in furthering that course, defining the data set we need, providing the tools to gather data and distribute data.
Yes.
Here in Finland, we have the Finnish Ecosystem Observatory System in the makeup. A similar kind of system would be actually needed on a global level. So there is a lot to do, and Unep could drive it.
Thank you very much. Jukka, Unep as a source of new ideas for the finance sector.
Yeah.
40 seconds.
Yeah, I think this has been really refreshing from Ali, and then also the speech by Executive Director and the Director General to sort of take the big picture, because in my daily life I'm dealing with the nitty-gritties of the regulation of the taxonomy and disclosure and green factors, brown factors. I think really the regulation and authorities should be focusing on these big things that have been mentioned, and then creating this responsibility in the banking sector, but not necessarily regulating the tiny bits of activities, because we really need to work with the customers and support them in the green transition. It's for banks, it's really customer by customer.
Yes.
And then having our friends in the ministry to make sure that we have the societal framework in place and the big issues in place. Really much welcome this approach.
Thank you very much. And Mari.
Okay, so thank you, Ali, and thank you, young people, for all the excellent work that you have done for accelerating, for example, the Finnish climate and biodiversity. policies. So it is very important that Unep also delivers new ideas on the table, but I think that it is as important that we get implemented those issues that we already know and that are today unimplemented. So I have one more kind of development proposal for the Unep and the UN, and that would be raising the importance and also ambition of the International Resource Panel. Because personally, I believe that we must have some kind of limitation for the use of natural resources. And one of the root causes of these challenges that we are facing today is overconsumption and also the linear economic system. Yes. So we really urgently must make a transition towards the circular economy and use more efficiently those resources that we already have in our societies. So it would be excellent to hear more about the IRP.
Thank you very much. Excellent point, and in this we need all of you, legislation, research, finance, and future studies. Yeah. So thank you very much. It was an absolute pleasure to have this conversation with you, and thank you for the audience, and thank you for the organizers and the speakers in the morning session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tanja and the panelists. This was very thought-provoking, and there are many things that we can take away back home and in our organizations, wherever we work. Now I have the pleasure to invite Executive Director Inger Andersen to provide her concluding remarks of today. Please.
Well, thank you. And I was listening very intently to the panel just before on the science policy interface. And just some takeaways from this and the broader conversation today. First, it's too slow. Look, IPCC told us 30 years ago that we were hurtling toward, that fossil fuels were causing climate warming, global warming and climate change, and that we needed to reduce. I was in the single-digit COPs. So at that point, I was actually fighting against even accepting the word adaptation. Why on earth would we adapt when we perfectly knew that we needed to mitigate? Now, I'm fighting for more funding for adaptation because we have been too slow. So the first point is speed, the speed with which science tells us something and policymakers take action is just too slow. Look, in 1924, it was known that lead was very dangerous to human health. And it was 2021, August of 2021, in Algeria, when the last liter of the last petrol was pumped into the last car with leaded petrol. Nearly 100 years of well-established science, but this is what it took. So we, Unep, we're this little band of soldiers, but you can only do so much. It takes that chorus of activists, of bankers, of researchers, of financiers, and of course of government employees to actually make it happen. So one, we're too slow. Secondly, I think, and this is what Lena and Leif were saying in the interventions, we need to decode and simplify. You come out with a tome that could be a door stopper. Good, all the science is there, but a banker or needs something more digestible. A school kid, a teacher, somebody the priest in church, they need to have something that is more digestible. We need to find a way of decode and simplifying. And that is an item that I take very close to my heart, and I try always to make stuff that is really complicated rather simple, not dumbing it down, but making it digestible, while still maintaining the integrity of the science. And that's a to-do item for Unep and for everyone, including, obviously, Leif, because when we work with environmental complexity, and the world is complicated, we need to find ways of making it simple. Third, I was thinking that probably there's something to do with the social contract between science and society, right? Why do we do science? Is it for the ego of the scientist? The publication record, which by the way is often behind a paywall, so that actually you can't access it unless you pay for it. Now the researchers need to get paid for his work, but hiding it behind paywalls is not the way. So we need to think about that social contract so that new knowledge is accessible to all. All too often I hit on a link and then I'm on a paywall. So I think we need to think about that. And then I think, and who said that? It was Life who said, well, and actually a number of others, this idea that it is not a straight line from science to policy and law and regulations. It's kind of a, oh, we did this, but that didn't quite work. And anyway, we've got these vaccines, but there are all these non-facts out there. So people actually think that there's magnetic fields in the vaccine and whatever else. You know, behavior, human behavior is a factor that we need to understand and take into account when we do science. And it's not as simple of saying, well, this is what you, and then, oh, okay, now we've got the laws. We need to understand that and have a better understanding of that. And then the issue around regulation, and I'm very glad that that was mentioned by Iucn, and obviously he lives it on a daily basis and has to make it work. But it is, when you have the overarching sort of principle at the global level, getting that down to that medium-sized enterprise that needs to figure out how it takes into account and can honestly, not with greenwashing, but honestly publish its footprint, its environment. It's not easy. And you know, you look at the EU vocabulary and so on, it's very, very hard. And I think there's a role to do there. And then, and this is the reality of the world in which we live, my 6th point, because I had 6, but I forgot to count them out for you. But anyway, I'm at number 6 now, is that we have to accept, not necessarily accept, we have to understand, there's a better word, that there are strong economic interests that will pull in the other direction. The fossil fuel industry. At times, the DDT producers back in the 60s, the tobacco producers who told us for years that it didn't have any health impact. We need to understand that there will be powerful interests that will pull in the other direction. That's a fact of our society. So being mindful around the science, how we put it out, so that it accounts for that reality that is there. This is where the IPCC, the IPBES, and yes, the IRP, and the new panel that we are going to establish will have the legitimacy to stand up and say, well, science says it is so. But there's a lot of misinformation out there, so countering that will matter. And finally, I think I should end with the youth. And you spoke very eloquently and very competently about the challenges that you would like to see being put firmly on the table. Understanding that we cannot live beyond planetary boundaries, that donut economics as a term, living within our means socially and justly and equitably matters. That will mean significant shifts for people in the wealthy world. That's a conversation that we all have to have. But you're right, because as Bruno said, and he's a professor, and you can hear that from when he speaks, ex-professor, that in fact, we are living way beyond our means, but you're also, that the other part of the world, the poorer part of the world, have every right, as I said, to expect to live like you and I. And you are also right in pushing for these new concepts, new legal concepts, and continue to do that, because I firmly believe that whilst they may not walk into the Finnish law tomorrow, they will find their way through the UN or otherwise into our vocabulary, and that will deliver us to a safer world. Yesterday was World Environment Day. In 1972, the headline for the conference was Only One Earth. And so I stand before you here today in a sunny day in Helsinki and say we really do have only one Earth. Let's take care of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Inger, and thank you all for participating in this seminar. Those who are here in the room and those online, I heard that there were almost 150 people listening to our seminar today. So, great continuation of the day, and see you soon somewhere. Thank you.